I found a haunted VHS tape, and now I can't sleep. If you like the story, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. Also, it would be fun if you let me know what time it is when you watch it. Let's begin. It started, like most bad ideas, with a late-night curiosity. I'd been diving into the deep web for weeks, scrolling through strange forums and underground marketplaces, looking for something unusual, something that would shake me out of the monotony of my days. I wasn't interested in illegal stuff. I just wanted to see the bizarre side of the internet that most people only whispered about. That's when I found the listing. It was tucked away on a site that specialized in rare and obscure media. The title of the post was simple, but it grabbed me instantly. The last tape you'll ever watch. The description was sparse, almost cryptic. A tape like no other. You'll see things you won't believe, things you can't unsee. Not for the faint of heart. Viewer discretion isn't just advised, it's mandatory. Beneath the listing were dozens of comments. Most were vague, filled with ominous warnings and fragmented accounts. I watched it. My life hasn't been the same since. Don't buy this. I can't sleep anymore. I don't know what it is, but it's wrong. So wrong. A few comments dismissed it as a scam or a prank, but the sheer number of terrified responses made me hesitate. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Something about the listing called to me, tugging at that part of my brain that thrived on the unknown. It wasn't just the mystery of the tape, it was the challenge. Could it really be as horrifying as people claimed? The price wasn't cheap, but it wasn't outrageous either. Enough to make me think twice, but not enough to scare me off completely. After a few minutes of internal debate, I clicked buy now. The confirmation screen appeared, and a chill ran down my spine as I read the final warning. By purchasing this item, you agree to accept full responsibility for the consequences. No refunds. I clicked confirm anyway. The transaction went through smoothly, and a message appeared in my inbox shortly after. It was from the seller, their username nothing more than a string of random letters and numbers. The message was short. Your order has been processed. Expect delivery within 5 to 7 days. Good luck. I couldn't tell if the good luck was meant to be sincere or sarcastic, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, I told myself it was just part of the mystique. This was probably some elaborate art project designed to mess with people who were too curious for their own good. For the next few days, I tried to put the tape out of my mind. It wasn't like I had nothing better to do. I had work, friends, and other hobbies to keep me busy. But every so often, I think about the listing, about the comments, about what could possibly be on that tape. What could be so terrifying that people felt the need to warn strangers about it? The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself it was a hoax. Maybe it was just a compilation of creepy found footage or some poorly made horror movie designed to look authentic. And yet, I couldn't shake the unease I felt whenever I thought about the seller's message. Good luck. On the 5th day, the package arrived. It was plain and unmarked, the kind of nondescript parcel that looked like it could have been delivered by anyone. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a single VHS tape with no label or markings, just a strip of black plastic with its window revealing the coiled magnetic tape inside. There was also a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased. I unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note in jagged, uneven script. Watch at your own risk. Once you start, you can't stop. I stared at the note for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to throw the tape away right then and there, but another part, the part that had clicked by now, couldn't resist. I dug out my old VCR from the closet, wiping off the dust and hoping it still worked. It felt like a relic from another time, and the thought of using it to play something from the deep web made the whole situation feel even more surreal. I set it up in the living room, connecting it to the TV and testing it with an old movie I had lying around. To my relief, the VCR worked perfectly, and then I inserted the tape. The screen flickered to life, displaying a wall of static that crackled and hissed. For a moment, I thought the tape might be blank, but then the static cleared, and the screen went black. A faint hum filled the air, barely audible, but somehow unsettling. Then, the words appeared, white text against the black background. You chose this. The hum grew louder, and the screen flickered again, revealing the first image. It was a room, dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a single chair in the center. The camera was stationary, as though it had been left on a tripod. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. Something about the room felt familiar, though I couldn't quite place it. The footage shifted abruptly, the image cutting to a close-up of a face. It wasn't human, not entirely. The features were distorted, stretched, and blurred as though the person were being pulled in multiple directions at once. The figure stared directly into the camera, its lips moving soundlessly. Then faint whispers began to creep through the speakers, overlapping and incomprehensible. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched, unable to look away. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a horror movie. It felt too raw, too wrong. The hum from the television filled the room, vibrating faintly in the air. My eyes stayed glued to the screen, waiting for the next image to appear. The whispers from the tape grew louder, layered and overlapping, like dozens of voices speaking at once, but none of them were clear enough to understand. The screen flickered again, the distorted face disappearing, replaced by a hallway. It was dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a flickering light at the far end. The camera moved shakily, as though it were being held by someone walking. The perspective wobbled, the sound of faint breathing accompanying the movement. I leaned forward, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway felt eerily familiar, but I couldn't place why. The camera stopped in front of a door, its surface scratched and warped, as though something had tried to claw its way through. For a moment, nothing happened. The camera stayed still, the breathing in the background growing louder and more labored. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, and the door began to creak open. The screen cut to black. I exhaled sharply, realizing I'd been holding my breath. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the dark screen, the hum from the television still buzzing faintly. My first instinct was to stop the tape, but something stopped me. I told myself I needed to see where this was going, that it was just some obscure horror project designed to mess with people. The screen flickered back to life, showing a static-filled image of a room. The same room I'd seen earlier with a single chair in the center. This time, the chair wasn't empty. A figure sat in it, their head bowed, their face obscured by shadows. The camera zoomed in slowly, the image crackling and distorting as it moved closer. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, their words still incomprehensible, but filled with a strange urgency. The figure in the chair began to move, their head lifting slightly, revealing glimpses of their face through the shadows. My stomach turned as I realized their features looked wrong. Their skin was pale and stretched tight over their bones, their eyes sunken and dark, their mouth twisted into a grimace. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a single clear phrase. "You shouldn't have watched this." I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the couch. The figure's head snapped up, their eyes locking onto the camera. It felt like they were staring directly at me, their hollow gaze boring into my soul. The screen flickered again, cutting to another image, a close-up of the hallway from before. This time, the scratches on the door were deeper, more jagged, and fresh blood seemed to seep from the edges. A new voice emerged, low and distorted. "It's too late now." The tape continued, showing fragmented, chaotic images. A pair of hands reaching out toward the camera, covered in dirt and blood. A figure standing in the distance, shrouded in shadow, their movements jerky and unnatural. A room filled with flickering candles and strange symbols drawn on the walls. The images didn't seem to connect, but each one left me feeling more unsettled than the last. It wasn't just the visuals, it was the atmosphere, the way the tape felt alive, as though it was watching me as much as I was watching it. The screen cut to black again, but the hum didn't stop. Instead, it grew louder, vibrating through the room, making the floorboards creak beneath me. I reached for the remote, my hands trembling, and hit the stop button. The VCR clicked, but the tape didn't stop. The screen flickered back to life, showing the hallway once more. This time, the camera was moving faster, the breathing in the background more frantic. "Stop it," I muttered under my breath, pressing the stop button again. The VCR whirred, but the tape kept playing. The camera approached the door at the end of the hallway. The scratches on its surface were deeper now, almost cutting through the wood. A faint tapping sound came from the other side, rhythmic and deliberate. The whispers returned, louder than ever, their overlapping voices forming a chaotic symphony. I could feel the vibrations in my chest, the sound pressing down on me like a physical weight. The door creaked open slowly, and the screen cut to static. I stood up abruptly, my hands shaking. "Enough," I said out loud, though there was no one to hear me. I reached for the VCR, intending to eject the tape, but the moment my hand touched the device, the screen flickered again. The static cleared, and my breath caught in my throat. The image on the screen wasn't the hallway or the room with the chair. It was my living room. The camera on the screen was pointed directly at the couch where I was sitting, the angle impossibly close. My reflection was visible in the television, my pale face staring back at me. My body went cold as I realized the hum wasn't coming from the tape anymore. It was coming from somewhere inside the house. I turned slowly, scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. The shadows on the walls were still, the furniture undisturbed. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, like a pair of eyes were burning into the back of my head. The screen flickered, and the image zoomed in on a couch closer and closer until it filled the entire screen. The whispers returned, their tone mocking, and a single phrase emerged from the chaos. "You're part of it now." The screen cut to black one final time, and the VCR ejected the tape with a soft click. The hum stopped abruptly, leaving the room deathly silent. I stared at the tape, my mind racing. This wasn't just a prank or a horror project. Whatever this was, it was real. The room was silent, but the air felt charged, like a storm was brewing just outside. My eyes were fixed on the tape, now lying innocently on the coffee table, as if it hadn't just played one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. My mind raced with questions, but one thought rose above the rest. What have I gotten myself into? I reached for the tape, my fingers trembling. The smooth plastic felt cold, unnaturally so, like it had been sitting in a freezer. For a moment, I thought about destroying it, smashing it to pieces, throwing it out, doing anything to get rid of it. But something stopped me. It wasn't curiosity, not exactly. It was more like a pull, an unseen force urging me to see it through. Against my better judgment, I slid the tape back into the VCR and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, static filling the room once again. The hum returned, faint but growing steadily louder, vibrating through my chest like an invisible heartbeat. I sat on the edge of the couch, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrest. The footage began with the same hallway I'd seen before, but this time, the scratches on the door had multiplied, covering almost the entire surface. The camera moved closer, the faint sound of footsteps accompanying its shaky movement. When the door creaked open, I braced myself for something horrific. But instead of a jump scare, the screen cut to a different scene entirely. A forest at night, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The camera panned slowly through the forest, the sound of rustling leaves and distant whispers filling the air. Shadows darted between the trees, too fast to make out clearly, but their presence was unmistakable. The camera lingered on a clearing, where a circle of stones surrounded a small fire. Strange symbols were carved into the stones, their edges glowing faintly in the firelight. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic symphony, and then the camera turned sharply, as though the person holding it had heard something behind them. The screen shook violently, the sound of rapid footsteps and labored breathing filling the speakers. The footage cut abruptly to another scene, this one inside a house I didn't recognize. The camera moved through a dimly lit hallway, the walls lined with cracked, peeling wallpaper. A faint tapping sound echoed through the space, growing louder as the camera approached a closed door. The whispers returned, their tone urgent and insistent. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a sickly yellow light. In the center of the room was a figure, their back to the camera. The figure turned slowly, their face obscured by shadows, but their outline was unmistakably human. They raised one hand, pointing directly at the camera. The screen flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw my own reflection staring back at me from the figure's shadowed face. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, distorted voice. "You shouldn't have watched this." The screen cut to static again, but this time, the hum didn't fade. It grew louder, the vibrations rattling the picture frames on the walls and the glasses in the kitchen. I grabbed the remote and pressed every button I could, but the tape wouldn't stop. The static shifted, and the screen showed my living room again, the same angle as before, with the camera pointed directly at me. My blood ran cold as I realized the camera wasn't just showing the room, it was showing me. I could see myself sitting on the couch, remote in hand, staring at the screen. But the image wasn't live. It was delayed. On the screen, I stood up, my movements stiff and unnatural. I watched in horror as the version of me on the tape walked toward the coffee table, picking up the hammer I'd left there earlier. The whispers returned, louder than ever, their words finally clear. It's already begun. I stood frozen, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of trick, an elaborate prank designed to mess with my head. But the figure on the screen, the version of me, moved with an eerie precision, its eyes fixed on something off camera. Then, slowly, it turned to face the television. Its gaze locked with mine, and a wide, unnatural grin spread across its face. The lights in the room flickered violently, and the screen cut to black. The hum stopped, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. I sat back down, my chest heaving, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the remote. I didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. The tape was more than just a video. It was alive, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every second I kept watching. But I couldn't stop. Something inside me, whether it was curiosity, terror, or the pull of whatever force the tape held, wouldn't let me turn it off. The screen came back to life, showing a series of rapid, disjointed images. A face distorted beyond recognition, its mouth open in a silent scream. A dark figure standing in the corner of a room, its shadow stretching impossibly long. The circle of stones in the forest, now surrounded by robed figures holding flickering torches. The images burned themselves into my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. My breathing grew shallow as I watched, unable to look away. The tape wasn't just showing me random horrors. It was telling a story that I was now part of. The whispers grew louder, forming words that I couldn't ignore. It knows you. It sees you. It's coming. The final image froze on the screen, the hallway from before, the scratched door now wide open. Inside was darkness, but two faint points of light glowed from within, like eyes staring back at me. The hum returned, low and menacing, and the tape ejected itself from the VCR. The room fell silent, but I could still feel the presence of something watching me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and saw the hallway leading to my bedroom. The door at the end was open. The silence in the room was suffocating, thicker than the oppressive hum that had filled it just moments before. My eyes were fixed on the open door at the end of the hallway, the darkness beyond it swallowing the faint glow of the living room light. My heart pounded as I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that the tape's horrors were just in my mind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The tape hadn't just been a passive experience. It had brought something into my world, something I couldn't explain. And now it was here with me. I stood slowly, every instinct screaming at me to stay where I was. But the pull of the hallway was irresistible, as though the darkness itself was calling my name. I took a step forward, my breath shaky, the floor creaking beneath me. The air grew colder the closer I got to the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The shadows on the walls seemed to shift and ripple, moving just out of sync with the flickering light from the living room. When I reached the threshold, I hesitated. The whispers were gone, but their echo lingered in my mind. It's already begun. I peered into the darkness, my eyes straining to make out any details. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered, stretching endlessly into the void. The open door at the end beckoned to me, its frame warped and uneven, like it didn't belong in my house. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward. Each step felt like a battle, my body resisting as if it knew something I didn't. When I reached the door, I hesitated again. The darkness beyond it was impenetrable, swallowing the faint light from the hallway. My hand trembled as I reached for the light switch, flipping it on. Nothing happened. The hum returned, faint at first but growing steadily louder. It seemed to vibrate through the walls, through the floor, through me. I stepped into the room, my body tense, the hammer from earlier still clutched tightly in my hand. The moment I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging the room into complete darkness. My heart leapt into my throat as I spun around, fumbling for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The hum grew deafening, and the whispers returned, louder and clearer than ever. It's here. I turned back toward the room, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. Shapes began to emerge, faint and indistinct, like shadows moving just beyond the edge of perception. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic, like blood. A faint glow appeared in the center of the room, illuminating the floor. It was the same circle of stones I'd seen on the tape, the strange symbols carved into them glowing faintly. The symbols seemed to pulse in rhythm with a hum, their their light casting eerie shadows on the walls. And then I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the circle, its form shrouded in shadow. It was tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long and its movements unnaturally slow. Its head tilted to one side, as though studying me, and its hollow eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. "You brought this upon yourself," it said, its voice low and resonant, echoing in the small room. I tightened my grip on the hammer, my hands slick with sweat. "What do you want from me?" I asked, though my voice came out barely above a whisper. The figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching across the room. "You watched the tape," it said. "You invited me in." I stumbled back, my chest tightening. "This isn't real," I said, trying to convince myself as much as the figure. "It's just a stupid tape. You're not real." The figure tilted its head further, its grin widening. "Do you feel real?" it asked. Before I could respond, the symbols on the stones flared brightly, their glow filling the room. The whispers rose into a chaotic crescendo, overlapping voices shouting words I couldn't understand. The figure raised one long, spindly arm, pointing directly at me. "The curse is yours now," it said, "and it won't stop until it takes everything." The shadows on the walls began to twist and writhe, their shapes forming grotesque faces that seemed to watch me, their mouths moving in silent screams. The hum vibrated through my skull, making it impossible to think. I backed away, my feet slipping on the uneven floor. "Leave me alone," I shouted, though the words felt hollow. "I didn't mean for this to happen." The figure's grin widened further, and it stepped into the circle of stones. The symbols dimmed slightly as its shadow stretched toward me, reaching across the room like tendrils of smoke. "You can't escape the curse," it said. "It's part of you now." Desperation clawed at me as I swung the hammer, the motion wild and frantic. The shadows recoiled slightly, but the figure remained unfazed, its hollow eyes fixed on me. "You can't fight this," it said, its voice calm. "The tape doesn't just show you the truth. It becomes your truth." The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around me. I could barely breathe, the air thick and heavy. My vision blurred, and the whispers grew louder, their chaotic voices forming a single chilling phrase. "It's only just begun." The symbols on the stones flared one final time, their light blinding. I squeezed my eyes shut, the heat from the glow pressing against my skin. When I opened them again, the room was empty. The circle of stones was gone, the symbols erased as though they had never been there. The figure was gone too, its shadowy form no longer looming over me. But the hum remained, faint but constant, a reminder that the curse wasn't over. The room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum that seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. The figure was gone, the circle of stones vanished, but the oppressive presence lingered like a shadow that refused to leave. I staggered out of the room, my legs weak and unsteady, my mind spinning with questions. I stumbled back into the living room, the shattered remains of my courage strewn across the floor along with the VHS tape. The tape sat there, innocuous in its plastic casing, but I knew it wasn't just a piece of media. It was something else entirely, something alive. I grabbed my laptop, the screen lighting up the dim room. My hands trembled as I navigated back to the deep web marketplace where I'd found the tape. The site looked the same as before, its plain design and sparse text belying the horrors it contained. I scrolled through my purchase history, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the listing for the tape again. "The last tape you'll ever watch." Beneath it, the warning burned in my mind. "Watch at your own risk. No refunds." I clicked on the listing, hoping for answers, but the page was gone, replaced by a single line of text. "This item is no longer available." I felt a pang of panic as I refreshed the page, but the message remained. It was as though the tape had never existed, wiped from the site's records entirely. Desperation clawed at me as I returned to the forums, searching for any mention of the tape, the figure, or the curse that now haunted me. Most of the threads were dead, abandoned by their creators, but one stood out. It was titled, "If you watch the tape, read this." My heart raced as I clicked on it. The post was written in disjointed sentences, the words frantic and uneven, as though the author had been typing in a panic. "The tape isn't just a recording. It's a vessel. Once you watch it, you invite it in. Don't trust what you see. It lies. But the curse is real." The post continued, detailing the experiences of others who had watched the tape. Each story was similar to mine. Unsettling imagery, a growing sense of dread, and a shadowy figure that followed them everywhere. One reply caught my eye. The curse doesn't stop. It feeds on your fear. The only way to survive is to confront it, but even then, it never truly leaves. Another reply offered a grim warning. Whatever you do, don't watch it again. The more you see, the stronger it gets. I sat back, my mind racing. If the tape was a vessel, then the entity wasn't bound to it. It was bound to me now. Destroying the tape wouldn't break the curse. It would only make it worse. The hum grew louder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to ripple. I glanced at the VHS tape on the coffee table, its presence feeling heavier than ever. It wasn't just a cursed object. It was a doorway, and I had opened it. I scrolled further down the forum, my desperation growing. Someone had to know how to stop this, how to sever the connection before it consumed me entirely. Finally, I found a post buried at the bottom of the thread. It was written in cryptic, almost poetic language, but its meaning was clear. The tape opens the path, but the choice is yours. Confront the shadow or let it consume you. To close the door, you must see the truth behind the lies. The words sent a chill through me. Confronting the shadow meant facing whatever it had unleashed, but how could I fight something I didn't understand? The more I read, the more it became clear that the curse wasn't just supernatural, it was psychological. The entity thrived on fear, on doubt, on the cracks in my mind. The more I resisted, the stronger it became. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling me. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. "You're wasting time." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. The entity wasn't just watching me. It was taunting me, pushing me closer to the edge. The hum grew louder, and the shadows began to shift again, their movements slow but deliberate. I could feel its presence in the room, watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I returned to the forum, searching for any mention of rituals or methods to break the curse. Most of the replies were vague or contradictory, but one post stood out. The only way to break the curse is to return what you've taken. The tape doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the shadow. And the shadow always collects. The message was followed by a set of instructions, written in fragmented sentences. Play the tape one last time. Confront what it shows you. Destroy the vessel under the shadow's gaze. The final line was chilling. The shadow won't leave without a price. I sat back, my pulse racing. The thought of watching the tape again filled me with dread, but the alternative was worse. The entity wasn't going to stop. It would follow me, torment me, until there was nothing left. The VHS tape sat on the coffee table, its presence a weight I couldn't ignore. I had opened the door, and now I had to close it. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the tape and slid it back into the VCR. The hum grew louder as I pressed play, the screen flickering to life with static. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing steadily louder. It's waiting. It's watching. It's coming. The screen cleared, showing the same hallway I had seen before. This time, the door at the end was wide open, and a figure stood in the doorway, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. The whispers overlapped into a single phrase. "Face it, or it will take you." The tape's static hissed like a living thing, filling the room with its oppressive presence. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, watching the hallway unfold in front of me. The door at the end was wide open, and the figure standing in the doorway was shrouded in shadows, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. The whispers from the tape grew louder, overlapping and incoherent, their tones mocking and insistent. The figure took a single step forward, its movements unnaturally slow and deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest as I clutched the hammer, the only thing between me and the unrelenting darkness of the tape's curse. The figure in the tape tilted its head, its glowing eyes fixed on the camera. The whispers paused, replaced by a single, distorted voice that seemed to echo through the room. "It's here." The lights in the living room flickered violently, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls and the floor. Shadows rippled and stretched across the room, their movements unnatural, almost alive. I tried to tell myself it was just the tape playing tricks on my mind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just on the screen anymore. The camera on the tape moved forward, slowly closing the distance between itself and the figure in the doorway. My pulse quickened as I watched, dreading what would happen next. The figure raised one long, spindly arm, pointing directly at the camera. For a moment, I thought it was pointing at me. The screen flickered, and suddenly the scene shifted. The hallway was gone, replaced by my own living room. The camera angle was impossible, showing me from above, sitting frozen on the couch with a hammer in my hands. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever. It sees you. It knows you. It's coming for you. The camera on the screen panned slowly, focusing on the coffee table where the tape box still sat. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural hum. And then, from somewhere inside the house, I heard a noise. It was faint at first, a soft tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate. I turned toward the hallway, the hammer gripped tightly in my hand. The sound grew louder, the tapping now accompanied by the faint creak of floorboards. I stood slowly, my legs trembling beneath me. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural energy that made it hard to breathe. The tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by the sound of something dragging across the floor. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. The only response was the hum, now vibrating through my skull like a pulse. The lights flickered again, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch toward me, their movements slow and deliberate. I backed away, my heart racing as the dragging sound grew louder, closer. From the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a dark figure standing at the edge of the hallway, its outline barely visible in the dim light. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, and its head tilted to the side, mirroring the figure from the tape. The whispers returned, louder and clearer. "It's here. It's waiting. You can't escape." I tightened my grip on the hammer, forcing myself to take a step forward. The figure didn't move, its glowing eyes fixed on me. The shadows around it seemed to ripple, reaching out toward the walls and ceiling like living tendrils. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised one hand, pointing at the television. The screen flickered violently, showing the same hallway from before. This time, the door at the end slammed shut, and the whispers rose into a deafening roar. The figure took a step closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. I stumbled back, panic clawing at my chest. "Stay away," I shouted, swinging the hammer in front of me. The figure paused, its head tilting further, as though amused by my fear. "You brought this upon yourself," it said, its voice low and distorted. "You opened the door. You let me in." The shadows around it stretched further, their movements becoming more erratic. The lights flickered wildly, and the hum grew louder, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. I backed into the coffee table, nearly tripping over the tape box. The whispers grew louder, their words overlapping into a single chilling chant. "It's only just begun." The figure stepped fully into the room, its shadow stretching across the floor like an ink spill. Its hollow eyes burned brighter, and its grin twisted into something impossibly wide and unnatural. "You can't fight this," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "The curse is yours now, and it won't stop until you give me what I want." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stand tall. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, though my voice shook. The figure's grin widened further. "You know what I want," it said. The whispers faded, leaving only the hum. The figure stepped closer, its shadow reaching for me like claws. I swung the hammer again, but it passed through the figure as though it were made of smoke. "You can't destroy me," it said. "I'm part of you now." The tape opened the door, and I'm never leaving. The hum grew louder, vibrating through my chest. I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on me, suffocating and inescapable. The clock on the wall struck midnight. The lights went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. The only light came from the figure's hollow eyes, burning like twin embers in the shadows. The whispers returned, their tone mocking and triumphant. "It's over. It's begun. You belong to it now." The figure raised one hand, and the hum stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. And then, in the darkness, the figure spoke one final time. "You can't escape the tape. It's yours forever." The silence after the figure's final words was deafening, a void that seemed to swallow the very air from the room. I stood frozen in the darkness, the weight of its presence pressing down on me, even though it had disappeared. My heart pounded in my chest, and my grip on the hammer was so tight my fingers ached. The tape still sat in the VCR, its casing a cold, silent reminder of what I had unleashed. The whispers were gone, the hum had faded, but the tension in the room remained thick and oppressive. I needed answers. I needed to find a way to end this. I grabbed my laptop and opened it, the screen's glow cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. My hands trembled as I navigated back to the deep web forum where I had first found the tape. The marketplace page for the listing was gone, as though it had been wiped from existence, but the thread discussing the tape was still active. Dozens of new posts had appeared since I last checked, each one filled with desperation and warnings. Once you watch it, you can't unwatch it. It's not just a tape. It's a gateway. If you're reading this, it's already too late. One post stood out, written in shaky, fragmented sentences. You can break it, but it won't be easy. The shadow will fight back. You have to destroy the vessel, but you can't do it alone. The words sent a chill through me. I read them over and over, trying to make sense of their meaning. What did they mean by "you can't do it alone"? Was there someone who could help? Or was it referring to something else entirely? Another post offered a grim warning. The tape is bound to you now. Destroying it won't break the curse, it will only make it angrier. To end it, you have to confront what it shows you. You have to face the truth. I slammed the laptop shut, frustration boiling inside me. Every answer only led to more questions. Face the truth. What truth? The tape wasn't just showing me random horrors, it was showing me something. But I still didn't understand what. I stood, pacing the room as my thoughts spiraled. The figure's words echoed in my mind. You open the door. The curse is yours now. The room felt colder, darker, as though the shadows were creeping closer. I couldn't stay here, trapped in the suffocating silence of my own home. I needed to act, to find some way to break the tape's hold before it consumed me entirely. Grabbing my coat and the tape, I headed out into the night. The streets were empty, the silence of the city unsettling in its stillness. I didn't have a destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to escape the confines of my house. The tape felt heavy in my pocket, its presence like a weight pulling me down. I thought about throwing it away, leaving it in some trash can, or dumping it in the river. But the warnings from the forum stopped me. Destroying the tape wouldn't end a curse. It would only make things worse. Instead, I found myself wandering aimlessly, searching for answers I wasn't sure existed. Eventually, I found myself outside a small convenience store, its fluorescent lights flickering faintly in the darkness. The clerk behind the counter looked up as I entered, his tired eyes narrowing at the sight of me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I hesitated, the weight of the night pressing down on me. "Do you believe in curses?" I blurted out, my voice shaky. The clerk raised an eyebrow, leaning back against the counter. "Depends," he said. "Why?" "You think you're cursed." I nodded, pulling the tape from my pocket and setting it on the counter. This thing is cursed. I don't know what to do." The clerk stared at the tape, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might laugh, but instead, he leaned in closer, inspecting the casing as though it held some hidden secret. "I've seen a lot of weird things," he said finally, his voice low. "But this looks like trouble." He tapped the counter with his fingers, his gaze shifting back to me. "There's a guy, runs a shop a few blocks from here. Deals in weird stuff, antiques, occult things. If anyone can help, it's him." I left the store with a mix of hope and dread, clutching the tape tightly as I made my way to the address the clerk had given me. The shop was tucked away in an alley, its faded sign barely visible in the dim light. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of old books and incense. The shelves were lined with strange artifacts, crystals, dusty tomes, and objects I couldn't begin to identify. An older man stood behind the counter, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto the tape in my hand. "You brought something dangerous," he said, his voice calm but firm. I set the tape on the counter, my hand shaking. "I need to get rid of it," I said. It's cursed. It's ruining my life." The man picked up the tape, turning it over in his hands. He didn't seem surprised or confused, only concerned. "You've already watched it, haven't you?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tightening. He sighed, setting the tape back on the counter. "Then it's too late to simply get rid of it. The curse is tied to you now. If you want to break it, you'll have to face what it's trying to show you." "What does that mean?" I asked, frustration boiling over. "I've watched it. I've seen the images. I've felt it. What else is there to face?" The man met my gaze, his expression grave. "The tape doesn't just show you images," he said. "It shows you the truth. Something buried deep inside you, something you've been running from. That's what the shadow feeds on, your fear of that truth." He gestured to the tape. "You have to watch it again. But this time, you have to look past the horror. Find the truth it's hiding and confront it. Only then can you hope to break the curse." I left the shop with the tape in hand, my mind racing. The man's words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the figure's chilling voice. "Face it, or it will take you." I didn't know if I was ready to face the truth, whatever it was. But one thing was clear. I couldn't run from it anymore. The walk back to my house was a blur, the streets seemingly darker than before, the shadows stretching unnaturally long under the flickering streetlights. The weight of the tape in my pocket felt heavier with every step, as if it was pulsing with a life of its own. By the time I reached my door, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. The house stood silent and still, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a waiting trap. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me out of habit, though I knew it wouldn't keep it out. My hands shook as I placed the tape on the coffee table. This was it, the moment of truth. The man's words echoed in my head. Find the truth it's hiding and confront it. I sank onto the couch, staring at the tape as if it might spring to life on its own. Part of me wanted to leave, to run far away, and never look back. But I knew that wouldn't save me. The curse wasn't tied to the tape, it was tied to me. With a deep breath, I slid the tape into the VCR and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, static hissing softly before giving way to the familiar hallway. The door at the end was wide open, the darkness beyond it deeper and more menacing than before. The camera moved forward, shaky and deliberate, the sound of faint breathing accompanying each step. The whispers began again, their tone urgent and chaotic, overlapping in a language I couldn't understand. As the camera approached the doorway, the screen flickered, and the scene changed abruptly. This time, the footage showed a room I recognized immediately. It was my childhood bedroom. My heart sank as I saw the faded wallpaper, the bed pushed against the wall, the stuffed animals I'd long since forgotten sitting on a dusty shelf. The camera panned slowly around the room, lingering on the little details I had tried to erase from my memory. It stopped at the closet door, which was slightly ajar, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The whispers grew louder, forming fragmented words. "Remember, it's waiting. Face it." The camera moved toward the closet, the sound of breathing growing heavier, more labored. My pulse quickened as I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the screen. The door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing. The darkness inside the closet was impenetrable, swallowing the dim light from the room. But the whispers continued, their tone insistent. "Look closer." The camera stepped into the closet, the screen going pitch black for several long, agonizing seconds. Then, faintly, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, staring directly into the camera. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural hum. The figure emerged from the darkness, its hollow eyes burning with an unnatural light. It was the same shadowy presence I had seen before, but this time it felt more real, more alive. "You've been running," it said, its voice resonating through the room. "But you can't run from the truth." I clutched the edge of the couch, my breath shallow. "What truth?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I wanted the answer. The figure tilted its head, its grin widening. "The truth you buried," it said. "The truth you refused to see." The screen flickered again, showing fragments of my life. Moments I had tried to forget. Mistakes, regrets, betrayals, all flashing before me like a nightmare reel. The images slowed, focusing on a single memory, a fight I'd had with my best friend years ago, one that had ended with us cutting ties. The guilt I had carried ever since was a weight I had learned to live with, but seeing it now, I realized how deeply it had shaped me. The figure's voice cut through the images. "You let the guilt fester. You let it define you. That's the truth you've been running from." Tears welled in my eyes as the screen shifted again, showing more memories, moments where I had chosen avoidance over confrontation, silence over honesty. Each one felt like a dagger, piercing deeper into the fragile walls I had built around myself. The figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching toward me. "You opened the door," it said, "and now the truth is here." The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic. their voices blending into a single overwhelming chant. Face it, face it, face it. I stood abruptly, the hammer trembling in my grip. I'm not afraid of you, I said, though my voice wavered. You're just a shadow. You can't hurt me. The figure's grin twisted, its hollow eyes narrowing. I don't need to hurt you, it said. You're already hurting yourself. The room seemed to ripple, the walls bending and distorting as the figure's shadow engulfed me. The whispers grew deafening, their words echoing in my mind. Stop it, I shouted, swinging the hammer toward the television. The screen shattered, sending shards of glass flying, but the whispers didn't stop. The figure loomed over me, its form flickering like a dying flame. You can destroy the tape. You can destroy the vessel. But the truth will always remain. The whispers stopped suddenly, and the room fell silent. The figure dissolved into smoke, its shadowy form dissipating into the air. I stood there, breathing heavily, surrounded by the remnants of the shattered TV. The tape lay on the floor, its casing cracked but still intact. The hum faded, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breaths. I picked up the tape, staring at it with a mixture of fear and determination. The truth the figure had shown me was painful, but it was mine. I stepped outside, the cool night air washing over me. The stars above seemed brighter somehow, their light cutting through the darkness. Taking a deep breath, I threw the tape into the fire pit in my backyard, watching as the flames consumed it. The hum was gone. The whispers were silent. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt free. The flames consumed the tape with a ferocity that didn't seem natural. The fire roared, its heat prickling my skin even as I stood several feet away. The hum that had haunted me for so long was gone, replaced by the crackle of burning plastic and magnetic tape. For a moment, I felt relief, pure, unfiltered relief. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me since the first time I watched the tape seemed to lift, leaving me lighter than I'd felt in weeks. But the fire's glow cast long shadows across the backyard, and I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me. I stayed outside until the fire burned itself out, unwilling to return to the house until I was certain the tape was completely gone. The charred remnants lay in the ashes, twisted and unrecognizable, but still faintly smoldering. The air felt different, lighter, cleaner. The silence was no longer suffocating but peaceful, like the world had exhaled along with me. I told myself it was over, that I had won. But deep down, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. When I stepped back into the house, the stillness felt almost eerie. The living room was exactly as I had left it, the shattered TV screen glinting faintly in the dim light. The hammer lay on the floor, a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded just hours ago. I picked it up and placed it on the coffee table, my hands still trembling. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m., but it felt like days had passed since I'd pressed play on the tape. I sank onto the couch, exhausted but too wired to sleep. The memories the tape had forced me to confront lingered in my mind, raw and unrelenting. The man from the shop had been right. The curse wasn't just about the tape. It was about the truth I had been running from, the guilt, the regrets, the parts of myself I had tried to bury. The figure in the tape hadn't created those feelings. It had simply dragged them into the light. The relief I'd felt outside began to waver, replaced by unease. The hum was gone, the whispers silent, but the shadows in the room seemed darker than before, as though they were holding something just out of sight. I tried to convince myself it was over. The tape was gone. The curse was broken. But the feeling of being watched lingered, an invisible presence pressing against the edges of my awareness. The hours crept by, and I eventually drifted into a fitful sleep on the couch. My dreams were fragmented and chaotic, filled with images of the tape, the shadowy figure, and the glowing eyes that had haunted me. When I woke, the first light of dawn was filtering through the curtains. The house was quiet, the air still, but the unease from the night before hadn't left me. I stood and stretched, my body aching from the tension of the past few days. The shattered TV caught my eye, its broken screen reflecting the morning light in jagged patterns. I cleaned up the living room slowly, sweeping the shards of glass into a dustpan and wiping down the coffee table. Each movement felt mechanical, my mind replaying the events of the night like a broken record. As I disposed of the glass and debris, I couldn't help but glance at the shadows in the corners of the room, half expecting them to move. But they stayed still, ordinary and unthreatening. The tape was gone, I reminded myself. The curse was over. Later that day, I returned to the shop where I'd sought help, hoping to thank the man who had guided me. But when I arrived, the shop was empty. The door was locked, and the faded sign hanging in the window read, "Closed indefinitely." I peered through the dusty glass, but the inside of the shop was dark and empty, as though it had been abandoned for years. A chill ran down my spine. Had the man been real, or was he part of the curse? I would never know. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal. The oppressive presence in the house was gone, and the whispers and hum never returned. But the truth the tape had shown me lingered. The memories it had dredged up, the regrets it had forced me to confront, they stayed with me, shaping the way I moved forward. I began reaching out to the people I had distanced myself from, starting with my best friend. The conversation was awkward and painful, but it was a step toward healing. Though the tape was gone, its shadow still lingered in small, subtle ways. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch myself glancing at the corners of the room, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. And once, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found a VHS tape that I didn't recognize. Its casing was plain and unmarked, just like the cursed tape I had destroyed. For a moment, I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I opened the case, it was empty. The incident reminded me that the curse wasn't just about the tape. It was about the choices I made, the truths I confronted, and the shadows I carried. The tape had opened a door to something dark and unknown, but it also forced me to face myself. And in a strange way, I was grateful for that. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that the curse hadn't truly been broken. It had simply shifted, waiting for the next person to stumble upon the shadows. Weeks turned into months, and the terror of that night began to fade. The tape was gone, the whispers were silent, and the house felt normal again. I convinced myself that it was over, that I had won. Life went on, though I carried the memories of the curse like faint scars, less painful, but still visible in the right light. But the feeling of being watched never truly disappeared. It lingered at the edge of my awareness, subtle but persistent, like a shadow I couldn't quite see. I told myself it was just paranoia, a remnant of the trauma, and tried to move on. One night, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. It was a VHS tape. The case was plain and unmarked, its black plastic surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. My heart sank as I picked it up, my hands trembling. I turned it over, expecting to see some indication that it was a normal, harmless tape. But there was nothing, no label, no markings, just an empty void where the title should have been. I told myself it wasn't the same tape. It couldn't be. The cursed tape was gone, burned to ash in my backyard. This had to be something else, something harmless. But as I held it, a faint hum began to vibrate through the air, so subtle I almost thought I was imagining it. I carried the tape downstairs, my curiosity battling with a growing sense of dread in my chest. The old VCR sat in its usual spot, gathering dust since the night I thought I had ended the curse. I slid the tape into the slot and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, static hissing softly as the hum grew louder. My chest tightened as the familiar scene came into view. The hallway with the scratched door at the end. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It can't be." The camera moved forward, shaky and deliberate, the sound of breathing accompanying each step. The whispers returned, faint but growing louder, their overlapping tones forming words I couldn't yet understand. When the door creaked open, the screen cut to black. I sat frozen, the silence in the room pressing down on me like a weight. The hum stopped, and for a moment I thought the tape had ended. But then the screen flickered again, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It was my living room. The camera was pointed directly at me, showing me sitting on the couch, staring at the screen with wide, terrified eyes. The angle was impossibly close, as though the camera was right in front of me. The whispers grew louder, and the screen zoomed in on my face. I scrambled to stop the tape, pressing every button on the remote, but the VCR wouldn't respond. The whispers rose into a deafening crescendo, their words finally clear. "It's not over. You open the door. The shadow doesn't leave." The image on the screen froze, showing my reflection. But it wasn't me. The figure staring back at me had hollow, glowing eyes and a twisted grin that didn't belong to my face. The lights in the room flickered violently, and the shadows on the walls began to stretch and ripple. The hum returned, louder than ever, vibrating through the air like a pulse. I grabbed the tape, yanking it from the VCR, but the screen didn't go dark. The image of the figure remained, its glowing eyes burning into mine. The whispers turned into laughter, cold and mocking, as the figure on the screen raised one hand, pointing directly at me. The room plunged into darkness, the screen the only source of light. The hum grew deafening, and I felt the weight of the shadows pressing against me, suffocating and inescapable. And then, in the darkness, the figure's voice echoed, low and resonant. "The door is open, Alex." It's always been open. I stumbled back, clutching the tape in my hands, unsure of what to do. The laughter grew louder, blending with the hum, and the shadows began to close in. With a surge of desperation, I threw the tape to the ground, smashing it with a hammer that had become my constant companion. The plastic shattered, and the film unraveled in a tangled mess across the floor. The laughter stopped abruptly, and the room fell silent. The shadows stilled, the hum faded, and for a moment I thought it was over. But then, from the shattered remnants of the tape, a faint, guttural voice emerged. "You can't destroy the truth." I backed away, my heart racing, as the shadows began to move again, swirling around the remains of the tape. The voice grew louder, its tone mocking and triumphant. "The curse isn't in the tape. It's in you." The room went dark, and the last thing I saw was the glowing eyes of the figure staring back at me, its grin impossibly wide. When the lights flickered back on, the tape was gone. But the shadows remained, stretching across the walls like silent watchers. I don't know if the curse will ever truly end. Maybe it never does. And now every time I pass a mirror, every time I see my reflection, I can't help but wonder, is it really me staring back?